Hello, everyone. My name is Rafal, and I would like to welcome everyone to my Headshot and Portrait podcast. Today, I have very special guest. Sesay is in the house, and I'm super excited. First of all, for accepting my invitation. I know you are extremely busy. You've got tons of stuff going on, but somehow we were able to connect, and you accept my invitation. So, thank you for joining the podcast today.
Thank you for having me on the podcast today. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's dive in right away. So first of all, and this is my kind of first question to every photographer I talk to. I
Mhm.
want to know a little bit more about your path into photography, especially, it seems like everyone has a different story and everyone has a different path. So what was your story getting into this industry, getting into photography, and basically doing what you do today?
So I left high school with no direction, and getting into school, I decided I was going to do computer science. When I was doing computer science, I fell in love with graphic design. When
Mhm.
I was doing graphic design, I wanted to do my own photography, so I picked up a camera, started shooting my own photography to incorporate into my own graphic design, working for like a lot of up and coming musicians. And then I fell more and more in love with photography. I got my
Mhm.
first camera, which was a Pentax ZX50 from this place called Jersey Camera.
Mhm.
Um, and falling further in love with it, you know, and eventually got a RZ67. I did a lot of street photography, also fell in love with doing a lot of studio photography, and got my first studio probably in 2001, while I was still in school
Mhm.
in Hoboken, New Jersey, 49 Harrison Street. It's burned down
Oh.
in a very questionable fire. But I was out of there way before then. And I've kind of never stopped since then. Everybody said getting a studio was a horrible idea because it wouldn't be able
Mhm.
to afford it. But it was probably one of the best ideas of my life. And yeah, ever since that, the rubber's met the road and hasn't stopped yet. All gas,
Absolutely.
no brakes.
Okay. So tell me what makes you choose this um, type of photography because you specialize in high-end fashion, portraiture, beauty. So it seems like you do all sorts of, variety of different stuff. But based on what I've seen on your website, on your Instagram, you specialize in fashion. So what kind of drive you into this type of photography?
So I would, I'm really considered a commercial photographer,
Hmm.
with kind of like a fashion and portrait bend, meaning I'm often shooting people. And it's what I was passionate about. It's what I wanted to do. I think early on I wanted to shoot a lot of music, and shooting hip hop around that time. I think there was always like a fashion appeal. There's always a stylist involved, bringing a lot of clothes. A lot of the creative was based around the different looks.
Hmm.
People were very concerned with what they were wearing and what their looks were, and therefore you start working with like certain designers that people are borrowing stuff from, and just looking for anyone to collaborate with. And the thing I love about fashion is there really are no rules.
Hmm.
Um, Not to say there's rules to portraiture, but when it comes to lighting, sometimes you can just do stuff because it looks good.
Hmm.
And I think that attracts me to it is because it's kind of like no holds barred. In terms of that creative window, it's much more open, especially in the work that you see
Hmm.
fashion photographers produce compared to what you see a lot of other photographers produce.
Absolutely. So let's dive in a little bit more into the creative process because
Yes.
that's something that a lot of photographers I think they interested about like how you manage this whole creativity because I think in your case whenever you working for a client there is some artistic director which has some agenda, there is some goals with specific photo shoot. How you implement your own creativity into those shoots, because it seems like there's also consistency in your work, so like your images somehow they are connected to each other, and because this is like a specific style which you can feel it from your images. And I know for a lot of photographers it's a difficult process sometimes, how they can sneak in their own creativity into those shoots. So tell me a little bit about, how you work to make your work, you know, basically it's yours, and everyone who sees it, basically they can say it, okay, you know what, I know this photographer create that.
Well, thank you, and that's a huge compliment. And it's difficult to process because I think every photographer has two sides. Not everyone, but a lot. And I would say my Instagram is highly curated,
Hmm.
and focuses on a lot of my teaching endeavors,
Hmm.
and not as much around as my commercial endeavors. And I would say, commercially, there's always a brief in terms of what the client is going for, and it
Hmm.
can be dictated by a certain style. It's going to be dictated by the usage in terms of like cropping, where the images are going to be placed.
Hmm.
And, the creative process really is a collaboration. I mean, a lot of people say that they feel as if though my work has a look. And I think certain work of mine does, meaning like if I work with dancers, um, or a certain genre of people. But I think when my commercial hands get onto it, it's really about understanding the vision that needs to get produced, and then there will be certain things I do. Meaning, I always like to have a light that kind of looks like sun in the shot if I
Hmm.
can. Um, but I'm in the studio. I like, I'm okay with like a dirty frame. Including a lot of the studio environment inside of things. And I think sometimes that then you start to intentionally dirty up the frame using some of what you find the environment as props. And I feel like oftentimes working on location with clients, um, being able to embrace what's there versus trying to clean it up, is something that I think would kind of define my style to a degree.
Hmm.
But sometimes I can definitely just start shooting really, really, really clean as well. So
Hmm.
it's definitely something I have to remind myself of.
Hmm. Perfect. So tell me a little bit more about, well, we talk a little bit about the creative process, but some of those images, they are extremely unique. So please tell me that, for example, like, one of your iconic images, which I don't know, it just keep popping
Mhm.
every time I go on Instagram, is this one. Um, can you tell me a little bit more about this shot? That was your idea, or that was just the kind of concept? Was the mood board which you prepared before? Tell me a little bit more about this shot.
So one night I was on eBay, and I'm not sure what I typed in, but I got the first thing that actually came up were harnesses
Hmm.
for parachutes.
Okay.
And I was like, these look cool.
Hmm.
So I started looking at more of these old harnesses, and I said, I'm going to buy one because I'm going to use it on a shoot someday as a prop. So I
Hmm.
bought the harness, and then I was like, well, I need to get a parachute. And I started looking up parachutes, and I found a parachute. So I had this parachute and harness probably about 6 months prior to this shoot. So
Hmm.
I knew that I was going to use them at some point for something. Um, and so the Ellen Chrome came out with this Ellen Chrome 5. They wanted to do this shoot that was about like adventure. Um, and they wanted to conceptually shoot something that was indoors and outdoors. So I said,
Hmm.
well, it would look really cool if we had a model acting as if though she's landing on a rooftop inside of New York City. And then we can come inside and do something very conceptual in which we just have these like bright, high key images with this parachute blowing around almost as if she controls it like it's her superpower, as
Hmm.
if it was like Superman's cape, you know?
Yeah.
And or Samson's hair, it's almost like it's one with her. And the first thing I did on this shoot was I knew that the thing that was going to make the shoot so cool is that safety was going to be like a question,
Hmm.
like this doesn't make sense. This isn't very safe. And so I had the model come for a fitting, and it was to do two things. One, it was to see the clothing on her, but it
Hmm.
was also to let her know before the shoot that this was like fully planned out. And
Okay.
so we put the harness on. I had the parachute blowing in the studio. We tried different wardrobe and really allowed her to be comfortable with the fact that, like, we talked about, we're going to tie a safety line here and have it attached to the building. And it allowed her to kind of go into the shoot not having those questions, like,
Hmm.
is this safe? What's going on here? But like, it was already familiar. It already brought the concept of like this dangerous idea into like a safe space. And then on the day of, it was really just about executing.
Mhm.
Um, Outside, a lot of people think it's easy to get a parachute to blow.
Mhm.
I will tell you one of the hardest things you can do is getting a parachute to blow when there's not a huge amount of wind.
Oh wow. Okay.
And so we had two fans. I had assistants that would be pulling on the ropes, and I kind of devised techniques where we can get air inside of it, and then we would fill it with two real effects fans and had that blowing. And it really helped that we did the pre-production ahead of time
Mhm.
because when the two fans are blowing at full tilt, you can't hear anything in terms of like my direction. So it was one of those shoots that was, the model was heavily involved in the creative process because once everything was going, she just had to perform, kind of be able to follow my cues, kept the lighting very simple so that I didn't have to worry about more than what was going on. And like you can see there's a line on that picture going off to the right hand side.
Mhm.
That's a line tied to the parachute, not the model, that is anchored to the building. And it's a very heavy duty climbing rope. Not that I had any fears that oh, she's gonna blow off the building and no one's gonna be able to catch her, but it's a just in case. You never know.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're finding the right location, where we did get some winds that were, I want to make sure we had a roof that was kind of facing east west
Mhm.
because that's the way the wind travels in New York.
Okay.
As it comes from the east, no, it comes from the west side and goes to the east side, and so I want to be able to benefit from some of that, but
Mhm.
also not worry about having to fight against the parachute blowing back the other direction. So that part played a key role. And after that, it was just having fun. Get this thing going, get the parachute wrangled, and yeah, I still have all those props to this day.
Oh wow. Did you reuse them, or that was like a one deal thing, and then you just kind of keep it as a, just in case some similar ideas comes to your mind?
It's the parachute we've used a lot. It's kind of like a background element in certain shots
Mhm.
in terms of really getting it to take off. I got asked at a recent conference to set it up as like a shooting booth.
Mhm.
But I explained to them that once the fans and everything are going, it's one of those things that sounds like you're on an airboat,
Mhm.
and it's cool for a little while, but it's not that conducive to like a workshop type environment where
Mhm.
multiple people can shoot on it. And then it has to be lit very specifically as well. So yeah, no, it's a shoot that I feel like everybody knows me for. They love the parachute shoot, and
Mhm.
I love doing it. I love producing it. Had a good team on it,
Yeah.
and the images came out really nice.
Yeah. Well, those shots are like iconic. I don't know how many time I've seen them, but it's one of those images where just engraved in your mind, right? Like you see it once and you just like, yeah, it stays
Thank
in
you.
your mind. And I think that photo shoot and those images, I don't even know where I saw them, but like it's yeah, something that really makes impact on the kind of the way you look at some of those images. So tell me a little bit more about connecting with your subject. This is one of the questions I always ask photographers, because
Mhm,
this is one of those key elements to make the image work, right? You can have the
mhm,
best lighting, you might have the best setup, the best ideas, but there is no connection between you and the subject. And you can visually see it through the images. Typically those images, they don't work. So tell me a little bit about your process connecting with your subject and how you kind of work with them to get this deep understanding, and then this the deep connection to get those shots where you're looking for.
So I think this is a very good question, and I think it works two ways.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on what the shoot is going to be, sometimes, and this is the benefit of working with professional models. Sometimes I put that responsibility on the model,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes that responsibility is on me.
Okay.
And there's always a bit that I carry that both of us carry because we're both human. But if I could explain, like if I'm doing a casting, I'll be looking for someone who I immediately connect with
Okay.
because I know on the shoot they're going to allow me to deal with the client and they're going to be able to immediately fall in line and just kind of know what to do and understand and read the room. If you're shooting a portrait, then it's very much about, okay, what music does this person like? What food do they like? What
Hmm.
time of the day is best for them? Um, what current events could be affecting their mood? Do they have a puppy? Do they have a family? Have they lost a close family member? Like, then you can start doing your research to find out, okay, how do I let this person know that this is a safe space? What do they define as a safe space? For some people, it's like knowing that someone was considerate enough to get whatever coffee or tea that they like, or nowadays people drink a specific water brand.
Hmm.
And it's like, okay, I'm being catered to. People here know who I am. I feel like I'm in a safe space. Therefore, I can now enter this other zone. I don't have to have my guard up,
Hmm.
and I think that the first thing you want to do, even if you're working with professional models, in which sometimes, again, depending on what the shoot is, there could be a certain amount of responsibility you want to make sure they're willing to take up. That's why some photographers, or even in movies, certain directors may have their favorites.
Hmm.
And then sometimes it's meeting the person where they are,
Hmm.
and making sure where where that place is that they are.
Hmm.
Or to sum it up, finding someone who can meet you where you are. If you have a certain vision
Hmm.
that you have, finding a model who can understand that, or a subject who can understand that, and help you bring it to life. So I think that it goes both ways. A photographer always has a responsibility, and making a connection with someone simply has to do with understanding where they are, what their limits are, and ultimately what communicating to them what you're trying to do.
Hmm.
And I wouldn't say the connection is deep, um, but sometimes it can be.
Hmm.
And I think you're trying to find ultimately what that appropriate amount of connection is to ultimately get what you're looking for.
Absolutely. So let's switch the gears a little bit.
Mhm.
And I want to talk a little bit more about equipment and lighting, because this is one of the questions where people always want me to ask. I
Mhm.
know sometimes photographers, they don't want to talk about it because everyone has kind of personal preferences when it comes to lighting. But what I want to know is, do you have any like a specific lighting setup you really like, or you basically this is determined by the photo shoot you're doing? Tell me a little bit about just kind of creating the lighting for your images, and also if we could just touch a little bit more about your equipment, just a little bit, so we have just a kind of the overview about how you work with equipment and lighting.
All right. So the first part of this question that I want to talk about is, what equipment do I work with?
Hmm.
So to be fully transparent, I have worked with probably more lighting companies than anyone in the industry. Because in my
Hmm.
early days, I worked for Profoto,
Okay.
because they were under the Mac Group umbrella. When
Hmm.
they left, I worked with Bowens,
Hmm.
and a continuous lighting brand called Limelight.
Hmm.
Now, fast forward, I worked with Broncolor, Ellen Chrome. There was a brand, Photix,
Okay.
Nanlight,
Hmm.
and you know, I've had the benefit of choosing all these tools along the way that I feel benefit my photography the most, in terms of what naturally feels right. Meaning
Hmm.
that when I use it, my intuition can look at something and know what it's going to do without guessing.
Hmm.
Um, and then sometimes there's technical reasons, in terms of like the size of a certain light shaper, or it may, in size, meaning like where it'll fit. Can I transport it easily? How quickly will it set up? And so my lighting kit now for stills is so big that I use a little bit of everything. I have Pro Photo lights, I have Westcott lights, I have Ellen Chrome lights.
Hmm.
When it comes to light shapers, it's across the board. This weekend, I was just using a Mola beauty dish. I have the Pro Photo beauty dishes.
Hmm.
I'm absolutely in love with the Broncolor Paras, but I also have a Godox Para. And
Mhm.
I've tried the Parabolics para. Um, I have a full complement of Profoto light shapers. I think they make the best hard light shapers in the world, but I've also really become very fond of using the Nanlite Fresnel
Mhm.
on strobes. Um, when it comes to soft boxes, I would say I'm not that picky. When I shot more still life, I was more picky about soft boxes because I wanted everything to be the same color. But now when it comes to soft boxes, they all pretty much do the same thing, and I'm really in love with like the glow para snaps because they set up very quickly.
Mhm.
But now every brand is kind of going to that model of this
Mhm.
kind of quick open soft box that no longer has like a rod in the middle,
Mhm.
or individual rods that you have to plug in on the outside. I love spotlights. I
Mhm.
have a lot of discontinued lights. I have an Elinchrom 18 and 36-degree spot, which I use all the time because you get a huge amount of power, versus using like the Westcott spotlight, which is really nice if you need really tight lines and you're in very close. Um, I, I when someone says, "Oh, I'm a pro photo guy," or "I'm a this guy," or "I'm a
Mhm.
that," I would say intuitively, pro photo is the easiest for me to use. And I think their hard light shapers are the best.
Mhm.
I think I couldn't live without the Elinchrom 75-inch Octa.
Mhm.
Um, and the Broncolor parabolics are just special,
Mhm.
and to say that you just use one thing, I think is just extremely limiting today.
Mhm.
And I think that you just have to try everything and find out what intuitively just works best for you.
Mhm.
That gets out of your way. You're not concerned about having certain issues with misfires or not being able to change power on something fast enough, or some people may want to use a certain light because it integrates well with like speed lights or their light meter. um so when it comes to equipment, I think you have to find out what you're most comfortable with you know
Mhm.
Another part of that question you asked was, in terms of like my lighting setups, do I have like a basic lighting setup that I go to? And I would say that I always start with a very, very hard main light.
Mhm.
Um, unless I decide that initially I'm gonna start off with something very soft. But I do like shadows. And then I will start to diffuse it if I feel like it's too hard. And I'll think about what quality of hardness am I looking to change? Am I looking to change like the contrast of the shadows? And do I want to add a fill light, or go bare bulb and let a lot of light bounce around the room? Do I want a huge amount of control in which I use a spotlight? And a lot of times I use a spotlight, but I'm not using it, to show the spot or
Mhm.
to cast a particular pattern, but because it's so controllable. Or do I want to move to a Fresnel where I get a little bit more spread, but a little bit more power, but still very clean shadows? Or do I want to go over to like a telezoom reflector, in which it's like, okay, I need power. And I need to throw light, a much longer distance. I'm going to go through a window, which by the time it makes it through the window, no one's going to be able to tell, what it originally was. So it's, as you can tell, that I could probably answer this question for the entire interview.
Mhm.
Um, it really depends on what my vision is, and
Mhm.
then choosing the light shapers and the tools that are going to craft it. If I'm going to
Mhm.
shoot dance, I'm really worried about flash duration,
Mhm.
and fast recycle. If, let's say, photo is secondary to a shoot that I'm doing with a client for this video on location, then it's, sometimes it's like I want a kit that's just going to pack up real light. I can set up quickly, in case I have to, capture a few stills on a video shoot, or if my assistant or myself has to hold the light for a long time.
Mhm.
I have certain cases, just depending on the way I can fit certain equipment in my car. I'll take a certain series of cases. I mean, it's one of those questions where people would look at me and say, "Well, what am I supposed to do? Because I can't access or afford all of that." And
Mhm.
for me, photography is my plan A.
Mhm.
It's I wake up every day thinking about photography for the past 25 years.
Mhm.
So you just accumulate things along the way. If you accumulate a new piece of gear every month for 25 years, it just adds up.
Yeah. So let me ask you, let's say, kind of move a little bit back, because I think a lot of photographers who watch those interviews, they either at the beginning of their journey,
Mhm.
or they just a little bit into it and they try to figure out, what they're gonna do next.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about learning the lighting, because I know this is something that you have to see it, you have to feel it, you have to have experience, you have to have a lot of shoots under the belt to start really seeing the light. And it seems like you are using a lot of equipment along the the time, and you've learned all this stuff. So
Mhm.
tell me a little bit more about the beginning of this process when you actually started doing photography. Because it seems like you had to start somewhere, and then you start kind of adding stuff up, and you start learning the step by step how this whole thing works. So tell me a little bit more about that journey, like when you started, because are you started like right away shooting in the studio, or you
Mhm.
started with like the natural light, and then you got like some lighting, and then you start using it, and then you start like really expanding towards where you are right now? I would like to know a little bit more about that story.
So I started out wanting to be a documentary photographer.
Okay.
And my first professor in college was Robin Shorts. She's still an accomplished photographer to this day. And the first thing I learned was how light changes at different times of day.
Hmm.
Because I would go out, I would take a picture. I thought it'd be cool. And she's like, "Yeah, this was really good, but you shot this in the middle of the day, and the way the person is positioned, these shadows really aren't that flattering. Is this what you're going for? Could this be in a stronger photograph if you did it in the beginning of the day or the early part of the day?" So I think learning time of day, because that teaches you the angle of the light relative to your subject, and it also starts to teach you how to intuitively look at light, meaning dealing with like very, very contrasty situations and oftentimes very soft situations.
Hmm.
And then I would tell someone, start photographing by a window. A window will start to act as your first light. It teaches you a few things. It teaches you how to position your subject around a light source. Um, and oftentimes, your subject understands like, okay, we need to shoot by this window because it's our light. So they're intuitively on board automatically. And then you can pull a curtain and soften the light, or you can pull a blackout curtain and start to cut the light. So a window really starts to teach you control.
Hmm.
And then from there I would graduate to bringing what you've learned there in the studio. And I would say start learning how to shoot bare bulb, and then let's start learning how to use like a 3x4 softbox. But there really are no rules.
Hmm.
um you know I'm looking to do a book on lighting, and it's like, okay, where do I start? And I think I can only start where I started,
Hmm.
and let people know the journey from there, because that's where I'm going to know the most, and hoping. But there's also just stuff I've learned along the way to recognize and to speak more intelligently about, and learning the real differences between hard light and soft light, and to be able to predict whether light is going to be hard or soft, um, and how to what can you do to make a soft light harder, and what you can do to make a hard light softer.
Hmm.
um, Understanding spill, understanding that if you don't want to, understanding that light falls off. um, and I say that because a lot of people are very concerned with like the inverse square law.
Hmm.
And I think that you don't need to know the inverse square law. You need to know that light falls off.
Hmm.
um, and a lot of people who claim they know the inverse square law don't know the inverse square law. um, and it is good to know it. It will help you to understand it, especially if there's things technically you're trying to achieve or replicate certain lighting. But to take a good photograph, it's not mandatory. I think being able to recognize good light is mandatory. I think being able to create it is a mandatory for some, not mandatory for others. A
Hmm.
great skill to have if you want to work commercially, in which you need to replicate someone else's vision.
Hmm.
Um, but in yeah, I would say the most important thing, and not to change the subject, the most important thing about photography is to fall in love with photography.
Hmm.
That is the most, anything that gets in the way of that relationship, whether it's equipment, whether it's people, whether it's your environment, the most important thing any photographer can do is to fall in love with photography first.
Hmm.
Everything will trickle down from that, because your love for photography will make you study or develop lighting that's going to work for you. And you may only need to take it so far. I want to teach lighting, so I take it a bit further.
Hmm.
But there are some people that developed a style around one particular type of lighting, and it just works. And if there's a situation in which it doesn't work, you'll be able to see it in the images that it doesn't work. But maybe, the style, the way they work with the subject, the type of subject that they're shooting, still has their signature on it. You
Hmm.
know, I think it's, what you put in front of the camera is a huge part of your signature, not just, technically how you light it or shoot it.
Hmm. Perfect. So let's get to the next element of this whole process, which is retouching. Can you tell me
Mhm.
about your retouching process? Do you retouch your images yourself, or you outsourcing your images? Because these days retouching is a part of photography, right? And it's a big part.
So
And I
I,
would like to kind of dive in a little bit more into how you approach retouching your images.
so retouching, I bounce between being a very good retoucher and a horrible retoucher.
Hmm.
And so when I started out, I remember Photoshop 4 was the Photoshop that's available when I started out.
Hmm.
And back in that time, I considered myself a very good retoucher.
Hmm.
Um, and for retouching, it was inexpensive to bill, let's say $250 an hour or $250 to $400 an image. Um, you had places like Box Studios. It was run by this guy Pascal Dangan, who was charging. I'm sure I messed his name up. I think I got the Pascal part
Hmm.
right, but the last name I'm sure I messed up a little bit. He was charging tens of thousands of dollars for retouching, you know,
Hmm.
and I think clients were more particular then. And like when you did a catalog shoot previously, like clients were very concerned that all the buttons were even like facing the right way, that
Hmm.
stitching was perfect. Sometimes you'd be on set and they would hire a seamstress to, and it still happens to this day, depending on the shoot, but hire a seamstress to literally be taking clothing apart and restitching it to get it to fit better,
Hmm.
versus just clamping things. And retouching, I mean, even there were rules to retouching in terms of like the way the hands on a watch should face in a product shot. um whether taking the little straw outside out of perfume or cologne bottles,
Hmm.
mostly perfume bottles, cologne bottles, sometimes you just kind of pour it in your hand. So there were all these little fine details that retouchers knew. Like if you had a retoucher that was really good at product, they kind of knew all these rules. Like the product needs to look like this. A lipstick should look like this. Like there were rules that people followed. And then it kind of turned into just kind of whitewashing everything. It was just like, let's get rid of everything that's not perfect and try to make things look as perfect as possible.
Hmm.
Um, and now retouching is automated. And so I've really embraced the automation. The first software I used that automated things was Retouch for Me.
Okay.
And then Evoto came along, and Evoto they've been changing very rapidly. And so now I use Evoto, and I use both of them. Like Retouch for Me, they have this app where you can easily clean up a background, you know?
Hmm.
And it's just like, oh, you shoot so much stuff on white. Sometimes you want to pull a new piece of seamless paper. It's like, now I can keep the seamless paper dirtier a little bit longer. And this app just goes in and just cleans up the seamless paper like that if I have dirt on it. Like, unbelievable. And then, Retouch for Me in terms of skin. Some people are a little bit heavy-handed with it. Some people are a little less. I've been very heavy-handed, and I'm learning to pull back a little bit. But like some of the videos I do for Adorama TV, the last video I did, I probably had close to 40 images in it.
Hmm.
And being able to have something like Evoto to do the retouching was unbelievable. If I had to do all that manually, I don't know if it would have gotten done. It probably would have changed the way I would have edited or the number of images I would have shown. So retouching for me has gone from a process that's been very manual,
Hmm.
and now I embrace automation. But some things I'll still jump in there and do manually, depending on how discerning the client is. I like the fact that I feel as if though I have both options.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's jump into the business side of photography, because I know a lot of photographers are also very interested in that topic, and if you want to be successful, in your case, commercial photographer, the business is a huge part of it. Can
Mhm.
you tell me a little bit about how you actually approach business and marketing when it comes to commercial photography? Because like we know, and based on my experience, it takes
Mhm.
time to build a business, right? It's not something that happens overnight. It's not something we can do it within minutes. It takes years in and out of hard work to build the clientele, to build sustainable business. Can you tell me a little bit about your journey, like, and then what would you recommend to photographers who are, let's say, starting off, how they can kind of put their feet into this industry and at least try to be successful and manage this the way that they can have sustainable business?
Oh wow, this is a great question. And how to run the business side of photography, there's so many factors involved. I think that the first thing you have to learn is the audience that's naturally attracted to you.
Hmm.
And then you also have to know the audience that you want to attract, and are they different? Once you know that audience, you have to then learn, okay, what is the value of my work to that audience? And how do I increase it?
Hmm.
How do I give my work a higher value? And I'm not going to say a higher perceived value, but a higher value. Um, and then once you find out the value of your work and who likes it, how do I reach more of those people? But how do I reach enough of those people so that I can stay in business and that all of them are happy, but I don't reach too many of them where I'm in such high demand that I try to take on all this work and I can't make all these people happy.
Hmm.
And then learn, okay, how do I grow? Do I need to scale my business to keep my prices the same and simply bring in more clients? Do I need to raise my prices in order to take on less clients? Um, and then you have to look at factors like geography. You have to look at
Hmm.
factors like, the current state of the economy. You have to look at, you know, you have to understand who else out there is doing it. And so I don't want to say understand your competition. I think competition is one of those things that'll kill you, but you do have to understand, okay, who else is somebody else looking? Who else would someone go to if they're not looking at me?
Hmm.
What other options does my audience have to get this thing done? And then you have to stay very open-minded to change, because the photography industry is constantly changing.
Hmm.
Um, and if you don't stay in tune with what those changes are, you will lose your business. And if you expect things to stay the same, change your expectations right now, because the only thing I know to be 100% truthful is the photo industry is always and constantly going to change. Retouching went to from a place where $250 an hour, you know, was inexpensive.
Hmm.
A drum scan could be $400 just for the scan. That doesn't even include retouching and dusting. And now you can send stuff overseas for $5 to $10. I probably get people on my Instagram from every country around the world asking me to retouch my images at least 20 times a week. And now we have this automated software that's just pumping out, retouching via, AI tools. And so the retouching industry is changed. Certain
Mhm.
industries may be able to still demand a high dollar, but it's going to continue to change, and scanning. Yes, some clients like shooting film. There are not nearly as many as there used to be
Mhm.
when it was mandatory. So, I think that the only way you learn the business part is to put yourself in play. It definitely helps if you have like an agent or someone who's just like, okay, this is the formula that you're going to follow. I know there's a lot of teachers in the industry who will tell people like, okay, this is a marketing campaign that you can run. Like I know, like when Sue Bryce in the Portrait Masters, they had like this 40 over 40 campaign, and it was a way of getting people's feet wet, advertising via Facebook. A lot of commercial clients aren't looking for photographers on Facebook. Where, I know some people who just find like a local group in their area, and
Mhm.
from that they're able to garner like a lot of work with like local businesses and people that are nearby. So it's and any advice I give someone on business now is going to change. But
Mhm.
knowing your audience, knowing your value, those things will never change, and there'll be a constant struggle.
Mhm.
I mean, when I graduated college, nobody came to me looking for a photo shoot and saying, "Oh, can you do this for $500?" $2,500 a day was undercutting like every professional out there.
Mhm.
Now you have people who want a lot and will expect you to work for $250 a day.
Mhm.
And you have to know whether, hey, do I take this to build my portfolio, or do I turn this down because I don't even want them considering me for jobs, at
Mhm.
$250 a day. So it's, man, it's just constantly changing. Photo
Mhm.
studios that used to be packed with photo shoots are now starting to do more weddings and events.
Mhm.
And this and now you can start to rent more photo studios by the hour, versus having to rent them by the day. It's
Mhm.
things are changing rapidly, and it's just staying in the mix. I've like I said, I've never tapped the brakes for a moment. And sometimes that's a bad thing, but it also keeps me very much in touch.
Mhm. So that leads me to my next question, and this is something also what I would like to have a little bit deeper discussion with you.
Mhm.
And I want to talk a little bit about the future of photography. Like I know we cannot really predict a lot of things, and I know
Mhm.
things unfold itself, and we have to just kind of go with the flow. But let's have a little bit of discussion about the AI. How this, in your opinion, is going to influence photography? Is this going to disrupt this to the point that we have to be kind of worried about it, or this is just another tool which is going to help us to be more efficient and do things quicker and better, or it's going to, I'm not saying replace photography, because I don't think photography can be replaced in the first place, but what do you think, what kind of impact the AI is going to have on what we do?
All the above.
All above.
I think
Okay.
it is going to be extremely disruptive
Mm-hmm.
to how quickly people want images and what that expectation is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Example, previously, sorry, I don't know what keeps
That's okay.
pinging, but previously clients were very okay with, okay, so when I was doing commercial photo shoots back in the day, we
Mm-hmm.
would shoot a Polaroid. I would scan the Polaroid. I would send it to the client. They would approve it.
Mm-hmm.
Then, or sometimes we would shoot on very inexpensive, well, expensive but low quality digital cameras for people to
Mm-hmm.
just like understand the frame, or a digital back. And then, I'd do email. I'd wait to get a response. They'd like, oh, I like this. Shoot a little bit more from the left. I would
Mm-hmm.
work on perfecting like one image. And then after I shot the one image that we knew was approved, then we shoot variations,
Mm-hmm.
get the film processed. After we got the film processed, do a rough scan, just like on a flatbed scanner. The designers would look and be like, okay, you know what? We want this frame and this frame. Send those frames out to get high res scans. After you get the high res scans, and it was like, okay, we'll lay in an FPO image, get client approvals while the real image is still getting retouched. So you had this
Mm-hmm.
whole process. then
Hmm.
and people knew that we weren't going to shoot something and then have it placed and ready to go inside of an hour. At least in the commercial industries, I think that you know news always had to move unbelievably fast. You know, but when it came to the commercial part, people were okay waiting. Now, you know, that timeline is going to get become even more and more and more condensed.
Hmm.
Um, it when it comes to the value of photography, it's going to change in certain industries, and it may hold more value in others. You know, like I know companies like Amazon, they don't allow renderings for like the primary image, and I think that's very important. But what if that changed? And now, AI images could be used for primary images on Amazon or other commercial purposes. I mean, I know the way that it affects me is right now I'm embracing it,
Hmm.
and I'm able to provide my clients with far more value. And people's needs for content are changing it up. Like for example, let's say if you had a marketing budget previously of $1 million, I'm just using a random number. You could take that marketing budget of $1 million, and let's say you shot summer, fall, and let's say a holiday campaign, you know, and you said, we're going to spend $300,000 on each one, and maybe a little bit more time around the holidays.
Hmm.
Now, instead of thinking about those seasons, you're thinking about, January, March, April, May, June, July,
Hmm.
where, now you're thinking about generating new content on a weekly basis. You have influencers giving you some content. You have your in-house team giving you some content. You have the owner of the business is now connecting with the customer and creating content in their living room. I mean, it's no longer a luxury to have this beautiful photo shoot and all this content. Like people just need so much content, and they're even willing for it to be off brand if it is genuine, you
Hmm.
know. So we're just seeing it happen. I think the value of a photograph is becoming less and less to people.
Hmm.
I mean, with all the wars and everything going on around the world, previously there would be an image that could get published that would give people pause. Now we digest photography so much that that's not the case anymore. There's been images generated now that would have given people pause, and now it's just like, okay,
Next one.
just next one. So I think that the value and the impact of photography is going to constantly change, and it's not going to be decided upon by me. It's going to be decided upon by the the younger generation coming up now. And if they decide that, hey, we actually like AI generated images and computer generated images more so than the real thing, that could actually happen. If they say,
Hmm.
you know what, we want stuff shot on film, we want there to be some sort of fingerprint that lets us know that this is real, that we're not being fooled, that this is genuine.
Hmm.
Just like, companies right now, will get, points for recycling, or hiring a diverse staff. I think that people could say, we want to work with companies that show real imagery,
Hmm.
knock on
Yeah.
wood or something. So I think it's gonna, and the important part for photographers to remember is don't silo yourself so much that you don't find that silver lining that you can follow. Because in order to build a business, you don't need to appeal to the whole entire world. You may find, let's say a group of health and wellness clients that have all natural ingredients in everything they do. They only want to photograph real people, and they require everything that they shoot to be on film. And that's just part of their brand. And that could be your client, and you don't have to worry about AI or any of this stuff taking from them because
Hmm.
it's the way that they want to work. Like you'll find it, you know. there's a lot of countries that aren't even as developed, you know, and your dollar could go much further there. Like I think that photography is just one of those things where if you keep your horizons broad, and when everybody is giving up, you're finding how to pivot or that silver lining. I think you'll be okay.
Mhm.
And I think some people, like when digital came, there's some photographers who just quit and just said, you know, with this digital thing, I don't even want to do this anymore.
Mhm.
I don't want to
Yeah.
embrace it. I learned film. This digital thing is too much for me. I'm done.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, that was a massive disruption, I remember, and then people were panicking and going absolutely crazy. I remember that part because I went through that transition, and
Mhm.
for me, it was just something that gives you a little bit more ability to do things which we're not able to do with film.
Mhm.
So it depends also how you look at it, right? But if you, let's say, shoot for 20 years film and then all of a sudden you have this whole new digital era coming in, of course you're going to be kind of terrified, how I'm going to, absorb all this new stuff and then, kind of transform myself into something completely different. So I think with the AI, it's a little bit similar situation. But also, like what you brought it up, and I want to kind of point this out about
Mhm.
this quantity, because like as you said, the value of image kind of went a little bit low because we've got so much of it that we don't pay as much attention as we used to before. But the one thing what I want to point it out, and this is what I would like to kind of get your opinion on this, because some of those images, like for example, we talk about it at the beginning about this parachute photo shoot, right? Which
Mhm.
took a lot of work. The idea itself, safety, the pre-shoot, you shoot in the studio, then you shoot into in the roof of the building. So there's a lot of work which goes into this, right? And then you have this shot which took you an hours and hours in and out to produce it, and people just look at it for like literally split of the second, and they like it or they don't like it, and they want a
Mhm.
next one, right? um so how this whole thing is going to affect photography? Are we going to go for, because how we can keep this quality and have this interesting and make this, as you said, something that's going to catch your eye and make you think, rather than this insane of amount, like we're going to need like insane amount of like not quality but the quantity of images to impact on people, right? How we can kind of keep the balance in this whole thing. That's what
I
I
think
think.
there was a I was listening. There's this documentary about Bill Withers,
Hmm.
um, and in the documentary, it's called Still Bill,
Hmm.
and he says, you know what? Everybody wants amazing because they're
Hmm.
asking him a question why he got out of the music industry after being so popular and having hit
Hmm.
songs. And he said, you know what? Everybody wants amazing, but on the way to amazing, you're gonna pass all right. And when you get to all right, take a good look around because you may actually want to stay there.
Hmm.
And when it comes to the parachute shoot, you could generate that shoot 100 times with AI,
Hmm.
but it's always going to be different knowing that it was done in person.
Hmm.
And, Jeff Bezos, I was listening to an interview Jeff Bezos gave, and he said, you know what? Humans are not truth seeking as much as they seek community.
Hmm.
And the one thing that photography does now more than it's ever done before is build community.
Hmm.
You have people who go out and they shoot together. You have hair, model, makeup, all these people who get together and collaborate on a day, blasting loud music, eating greasy food, and taking pictures. And there's something in that people are not going to want to lose.
Hmm.
And I think that is where I'm looking for that's the silver lining that I'm looking for.
Hmm.
Because it's going, sometimes what happens is that the size of something stays the same, but there's this other thing growing around it that is the kind of the fruit of the original seed, you know?
Hmm.
And I think there's going to be an entirely new image industry of image making that was born from traditional photography, that was born from painting, that is going to grow around it, but is not going to get rid of the original thing. I mean, think about it. Painting started out kind of to solve the problem of the first photograph to a degree, painting a portrait or a landscape or an object of affection.
Yeah.
And people still paint, and paintings still have a very high value. Um, and now photography has grown around painting and become its own thing. And I think that digital imagery is going to grow around, or has been growing around, photography. And I think photography is still going to be here. There's a love for cameras that exists. There's a love for all the tools that make photographs,
Yeah.
and there's a love for connecting with like-minded people and going out and taking pictures and seeing someone else's point of view that I
Yeah.
think simply is not, people feel beautiful in front of the camera. That none of that is going to go away.
Mm.
I think on the commercial side of things, yeah, things are going to change. I mean, no one was upset when Jar Jar Binks was in Star Wars. They were celebrating like, "Oh, look what we could do with CGI," not knowing that pretty soon someone could do it with the snap of a finger. That's when people have a problem with it, when it becomes more accessible, you know?
Mm. Yeah.
And so, oh, go ahead.
Well, what I want to say, and then I 100% agree with you that even these days we take more pictures than ever, right? Like
Hmm.
back in the days, photography was like a exclusive and very expensive thing. Nowadays, as you said, like can snap the camera, but we still do it, and the scale that is just insane. So as I agree with you that this whole thing is not going to go away. But the one thing also I want to just kind of bring to the light again, because you just telling me a lot of things which is like really like lights up my brain for whatever reason, and this
Hmm.
whole thing about community, it's fascinating, right? Like and I've noticed that even in my kind of little world where I do headshots, I was able to collect all these amazing individuals and create this community which grow to insane numbers, to be honest, which I never expect this is going to go that path.
Hmm.
But you brought this
Congratulations.
amazing point that we can kind of build photography around communities, about specific topics, about specific teams, and kind of run this way. So photography is going to evolve to something completely different, new. That's very, very interesting point of view, and I think you just hit the nail on the head with that maybe we should look at this completely different way nowadays.
Yeah, and I think it's I don't know if it's how do I say it? I don't know if it's looking at it differently versus just looking at it for what it is.
Yes. Yeah.
And when you look at it for what it is, you see what it's transforming into.
Mhm.
And you keep finding your place and what you're passionate about doing. Like right now I'm very passionate about lighting. Previously I was very passionate about just going out and doing street photography.
Mhm.
I still have probably 100 rolls of film that I haven't developed from, I don't know, 15,
Wow.
20 years ago, 20 years ago,
Wow.
25 years ago. I mean, yeah, it's, I'm moving faster than I can even process sometimes. And I just think that, for me, money is always a concern, but it's never the concern.
Mhm.
It's gonna come if you stay passionate about this and you're realistic in terms of the value of your images and your time.
Yeah. So let's wrap this up with my final question.
Mhm.
Please tell me what would be your one advice to photographers who are starting off, people who feel this desire to be creative, to do photography. They starting in, and what would be the advice from someone who you've been in this industry for a very long time?
Mhm.
What would you tell them?
Don't have a plan B.
Okay.
At the end of the day, my advice is be so passionate about photography and don't let anyone change that. I mean, I have a lot of friends who are artists. I have
Mhm.
some who are photojournalists. They can look what I do commercially and say, hey, I just don't like this. And you have to be okay with that. You have to
Mhm.
really learn to love what you do. And if you have a vision and you execute it, you'll love it. People can be critical of it. Learn to understand where they're coming from, but also just learn to love what you love and be very passionate about your photography. And if you want to do this, have no plan B and it'll work out. I don't know any photographer who looks at this and this is their plan A and it doesn't work out.
Hmm.
And it's not your journey isn't going to be like someone else's. Here, I just started teaching, let's say, 2020.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of people, I can consider contemporaries who've been doing it a lot longer than I have. And now I've fallen in
Mhm.
love with teaching. And now that I'm approaching teaching from a point in which I have learned more, I think that I garner more respect off the back versus if I started kind of stumbling my way through still understanding photography to a point.
Mhm.
Um, so everything happens for a reason,
Mhm.
good or bad. Have no plan B. Look at this as plan A and keep finding your
Make
way.
me. Yeah. Perfect. That was absolutely a pleasure talking to you. You brought so many interesting points to this discussion, and even my brain is on fire right now with some of those things because it's interesting to see others people perspective, and especially for someone like you who been in this industry for such a long time, and then you really see things the way they are. Let's put that way. So I truly appreciate that you found the time. We had a chance to talk, and I'm sure everyone who will be listening to this, it's gonna get some kind of interesting thoughts coming to their mind. To don't give up, as you said. There's no plan B. There's no exit. You either stick to it and make it work, whatever it takes.
Giving up isn't an option. You're just
Yeah,
gonna die or not.
yeah.
There's no giving up.
There's no. Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm going to link all your social media to this podcast so people can dive in more into your work. You said you're teaching as well. So if you're going to, we'll talk a little bit after. If
Absolutely.
there's any courses, tutorials, whatever you have going on, we'll link that so people can look into this and hopefully work with you because your work is absolutely stunning, and it
I
seems like
appreciate
you
it.
you you put heart into this, and then you can really see it on every image.
Cool. I thank you. Thank you for having me. This has been amazing. And anytime you want to do it again, I
Yes,
love
yes.
spreading
I
my
think we
light.
just scratched the surface today. So you know what? I will definitely will make it part two of this conversation, and we're gonna dive deeper into some other stuff because, as I said, like there's so much to cover that we could spend probably hours and hours talking about it.
Awesome. No, that would be excellent.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.